My boyfriend lost his memory and didn't remember who I was at all. I went to see him with a fruit basket in my hand, but when he saw me for the first time, he said he felt annoyed. The car accident that happened a week ago made him lose most of his memories. When he woke up, he didn't remember me. I crouched beside his bed, crying, and he told me to go outside and stop making noise. I said that we were about to get married soon, and he said it was just as well not to. Ethan said that his memory loss was an opportunity given to him by God. It allowed him to stay away from me, a woman he didn't like at first sight, and he didn't have to step into the grave of love again. I brought you the oranges you like, Ethan. I tried to liven up the atmosphere. He frowned and looked at me. I don't like oranges. My hand that was halfway through peeling an orange stopped awkwardly. In the past, it was always Ethan who peeled oranges for me. When I asked him what fruit he liked, he would put his arm around me and kiss the corner of my mouth. I like whatever Amelia likes. Ethan, why don't you want to get to know me? I wanted to force a smile, but it turned out to be an uglier expression than crying. Maybe if you got to know me, you would like. Is there any need for that? He sneered, and the corners of his mouth were full of sarcasm. Yes, Ethan had always been heartless towards outsiders. Ethan's friends also came to see him. I wasn't very liked by Ethan's friends. Ethan and I were actually from different worlds. They always said that I was reaching above my station and didn't know what tricks I had used to win Ethan over. In fact, it was Ethan who chased after me. He cornered me against the wall, bent down and said, "Amelia, would you like to spend the rest of your life with me?" Ethan's childhood friend came to see him. They were talking in the ward, and I felt a bit awkward standing there, so finally I had to leave the ward. "Sister-in-law, have you had lunch?" When his childhood friend came out, he closed the door and scratched his head as he asked me. I shook my head. "Sister-in-law, you should remember to eat. You donated 400 milliliters of blood for Ethan that day, right? Buy something to replenish blood, like pig liver." I hummed in response, and then silence fell between us again. The cold white fluorescent light coldly reflected the shadows on the wall. After a long while, he sighed. "Sister-in-law, have you ever thought about what you should do if Ethan really can't remember anything?" "What should I do?" I twirled the ring on my ring finger. It was the ring Ethan gave me when he proposed to me. He put the ring in my birthday cake, and I almost ate it. It seemed that I remembered that dimly lit night again. He pressed against me and said that he was almost driven crazy by how much he liked me. Now, he told me to stay away from him. "Sister-in-law, I didn't mean to say you're not good, but you also know that you and Ethan were never really suitable for each other. Alas, maybe you should still." "No way." I stood up and refuted him. I didn't even know what I was angry about myself. Probably my eyes were red, and he was startled by me. "Why do you have to keep pestering him?" His childhood friend's eyes were indifferent, seeming to show pity, yet also looking down on me who was struggling. I cooked fish soup for Ethan and took it to him. "What are you doing here?" I never thought that one day I would be snapped at by him like this, and that his eyes, which were like deep, cold pools, would look at me like this. "I cooked fish soup for you. Amelia, is that right?" Suddenly, he called my name. "How much money do you want to leave me alone?" I opened my mouth, looking at him in disbelief. "Don't be like this, Ethan." I forced a smile at the corners of my mouth, wanting to smile at him, but couldn't. "Don't be angry. Don't drive me away. You said you liked me." Some words stuck in my throat. But he just frowned tightly. "Amelia, I don't need you to come and see me." I put the cooked fish soup on his table and thought to myself, was I too aggressive looking, so that his first impression of me was so bad? But these days I had tried my best to smile at him. I had never been so gentle with him before. "Ethan, I cooked it for a long time. Drink it while it's hot." After saying that, I left the ward. There was hardly anyone in the swaying corridor. I slowly crouched down. I felt a bit dizzy. When I donated blood, the doctor had actually reminded me that with my constitution, I shouldn't donate so much blood. But at that time, Ethan was being pushed into the emergency room, and I couldn't care about that. Even in this chaotic moment in my mind, I could still remember how good he had been to me before. He was so good that even if I sneezed, he would hurriedly tuck me into the quilt. And now, this person didn't even want to give me a glance. On the day Ethan was discharged from the hospital, I still went to pick him up. The door was slightly ajar. The voices of him and his childhood friend came from inside. "You're being discharged from the hospital. Aren't you going to inform Amelia?" "Why should I inform her? You lived with her before you lost your memory. You've been living together for a year. Now that you're going back, you surely have to go back to that home." For a long while, he didn't reply. "Hey, there's also a thermos box here. Is it yours? Why is it so heavy?" The fish soup inside has gone bad." The fish soup I cooked for him. He hadn't even opened it. "It was cooked by Amelia for you, right? You used to love the fish soup she cooked. You would always boast about it in front of us brothers." "Really? Then I must have been really sick before." I heard his disgusted words so clearly, all too clearly. I pushed the door open and looked at the two people standing in the room. His childhood friend obviously felt a bit awkward, but Ethan still had no expression on his face. His dark eyes stared at me unhappily, looking as if he was asking why I had come. "Ethan, are you feeling better?" I pursed my lips and walked forward to ask him. Forget it. He had lost his memory. How could I haggle with a patient like this? He sneered and walked past me. "Why do you dislike me so much, Ethan?" While waiting for the elevator in the corridor, I grabbed the hem of his clothes. "Does one need a reason to dislike someone?" He frowned as he looked at me. "The doctor said that your perception is a bit confused. Have you perhaps imposed the impression you have of others onto me? Think whatever you like." The hem of his clothes was pulled out of my hand. When I was opening the door, he kept his head down, and I didn't know what he was thinking. They used to always say that Ethan had a cold personality, but I didn't think so at all. He would always rub his high and straight nose against my neck and say my name over and over again. Now, I realized that he had always been icy cold to those he wasn't interested in, right down to his bones. "Ethan, look at our home. Do you have any impression of it?" I looked at him hopefully. He sighed. "Amelia, stop pretending." Pretending? What was I pretending about? We were never affectionate with each other, were we? I've heard that the pretense of our affection in front of others was all fabricated by you. Our affection was my fabrication? My eyes widened, and I looked at him in disbelief. "Who did you hear that from?" He lowered his eyes and simply ignored my question. "Don't listen to what others say randomly, Ethan. We were really." Perhaps the door had been open for too long, and the wind rushed in all at once. I shivered. I had never felt our home was this cold before. "I've already been looking for a new place. I'll stay here temporarily for these few days. I won't bother you, and I hope you won't bother me either." But his words were even colder. I hadn't slept alone for a long time. I was afraid of the dark, so I always liked to leave a small nightlight on beside the bed. In the past, when Ethan slept with me, I wasn't afraid at all. The room was pitch black. I hugged my knees, unable to fall asleep no matter what. Actually, I hadn't slept well these past few days. I kept having dreams, and all I dreamed about was him abandoning me. But in reality, it seemed that there wasn't much difference from the dreams. Ethan was someone who suddenly appeared in my life. Well, not exactly suddenly. According to him, I had known him since I was very young. He and his childhood friend grew up in the welfare home next to my house. I had no impression of him when we were children, but I was deeply impressed by him when he grew up. In summer, the tall man bent down, and his staggered shadow swayed on him. He said, "I finally found you." When I met him, he was a music teacher at a primary school. Later, I found out that it was just a cover-up job for what he actually did. He never told me what he was really doing, although actually, I could guess a bit. One day, I saw him come back covered in injuries. When I opened the door, he could hardly stand. His clothes were all bloody, carrying the smell of the night wind and rust. In the end, he was afraid that the blood on him would get on me. I supported him, so panicked that I didn't know what to do. I had never experienced such a thing before. I wanted to touch that red-black liquid to see if it was real, but instead I touched the exposed wound. That was a world I had never seen before, a place I could never step into in my lifetime. I wanted to call for help, but he grabbed my wrist. He smiled somewhat indifferently and asked me what I had eaten for dinner. "Let's go to the hospital, Ethan, bear with it for a while longer." I wanted to pull him, but I couldn't move him at all. The weight of the man was pressing on me, and I was also afraid of touching his wounds. "It's okay, Amelia. Are you afraid of me?" At that time, he was still smiling. "Are you afraid of me covered in blood? But I'm afraid that if I don't come to see you now, I'll never be able to see you again." I cried my heart out. Later, his childhood friend took him to a private clinic. And later still, I found out that he had deliberately come to see me covered in blood. He knew that no matter how much he tried to hide it, in the end, he couldn't hide what he did. So he simply gave me a heads up and vaguely told me, my boyfriend might not be a good person. I thought that perhaps he had always been a bad person. It was just that the claws he had retracted in front of me before were now out. I made breakfast for him. When he came downstairs, it made me feel, in a daze, that nothing had happened. He hadn't lost his memory, and he still loved me. But my Ethan wouldn't ignore me. "You should still eat something in the morning." Seeing that he was about to open the door and leave, I quickly stepped forward and grabbed the sleeve of his clothes. "Amelia." He gently curved the corners of his mouth. When he smiled, he still looked as elegant as before. When he looked at me against the light, it seemed that I could still find the shadow of his former tenderness. If it weren't for the sarcastic look in his eyes. "You're really persistent." "Yes, when did I become like this?" I didn't want to let him go. I didn't want to admit the fact that he had already forgotten me. The little voice in my heart was shouting that it shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like this. "You said you liked me. I don't believe that you would dislike me as soon as you opened your eyes." My whitened knuckles were pried open one by him. The ring he had given me once flashed on my finger for a moment, like dust that no one cared about. After he left, I sat alone on the sofa for a long time. There was a doll on the sofa, a long, unnamed creature. I caught it when we went to the amusement park. I don't know how many times more money I spent to catch it. When people get carried away, it's probably like this. I kept shaking the claw machine without stopping, and he was silently putting in game tokens beside me. In the end, the result of catching it wasn't very satisfactory. Actually, I had a hunch that I had spent a lot of money, but he didn't tell me the specific amount. He pinched the doll with his well-defined fingers and laughed at how ugly it was. It was long and took up space. Later, he threw it on the sofa, and when we were doing certain things, he would use it to cushion under my waist. Perhaps I had never really understood Ethan. Or maybe he had hidden his true self too well in front of me. Ethan had always indulged me unconditionally. Sometimes I could even tell that he spoiled me too much. He had never been angry with me or snapped at me. Sometimes I also felt that I liked him too much. In fact, after my father passed away, for me, he was the only one left in my world. One night, I couldn't fall asleep no matter what. I sent him a message asking where he was, and he gave me an address. I admit that when I saw this kind of place at first glance, I got angry. I almost immediately sat up in bed, completely awake, and took a taxi to the destination. The driver even thought I was going to catch a mistress. I didn't know if there was a mistress or not, but Ethan was waiting for me at the entrance. The colorful neon signs lit up the pitch-black night, and the noisy singing was clamorous. The moment I saw him, I couldn't ask anything. He came forward and took my hand, saying something like, "You really came." He clearly knew that I would rush over. "Amelia, let me guess, couldn't you sleep?" I stared silently at the line of his jaw, thinking that perhaps I was charmed by his eyes that shone brightly in the moonlight. Even the noisy darkness seemed to become silent. It was on that day that he started to call me Amelia instead of just Amelia. I think I can't forget it. The memories are too thick and have carved too deeply into my heart. If there were some kind of water in the world that could make one forget the past, I wish I could have a glass. Don't just give it to him, just give me a glass. My younger sister called me. She's the child of my mother and my stepfather. Although we do have blood ties, the relationship between her and me is probably to the extent that we wish we would never see each other in this life. Sister, I heard that your boyfriend dumped you? She was so arrogant on the phone. Does it have anything to do with you? I frowned. Nope. I'm just greeting you, sister. You're alone again, right? No one's protecting you now, hee hee. My younger sister had always been jealous of my good fortune since she was a child. As long as it was something related to me, she would try to snatch it away. Ethan probably made her feel embarrassed a few times when we were together, and she had been holding a grudge until now. By the way, sister, I have one more thing to tell you. My coming-of-age ceremony will be held next week. However, you probably don't have the face to attend, right? After my mother married another man, she completely cut off ties with me. But I don't understand why this half-sister of mine has such great hostility towards me. Obviously, she had lived in the best villas and attended international schools since she was a child. When my father and I were sitting at the table calculating the cost of meals, their family was probably having dinner in a revolving restaurant. When I was 18, my father brought me a cake from the pastry shop at the door, while for her 18th birthday, there was a luxurious coming-of-age ceremony. I always felt that her phone call was malicious. She had once asked Ethan out in the name of my sister and was rejected by Ethan with a frown. So later, when I saw the photo she sent me in the afternoon, my heart still sank a little. It was a photo of a dinner gathering. Both Ethan and she were in it. She was smiling sweetly, while Ethan's eyes were still cold. Was it something that happened at noon today? They had a meal together. I know my sister has always been interested in Ethan. But Ethan was ostensibly a music teacher. How did they end up at the same dinner gathering? Also, the Ethan who has lost his memory, does he really know about those shady deeds he had been doing all along? When I called Ethan, I found that he had blocked me. That night, he didn't come back either. I had no choice but to call his childhood friend. Sister-in-law? What's the matter? His childhood friend hadn't blocked me. It seemed a bit noisy. His childhood friend was a smooth and sophisticated person and was probably Ethan's most trusted deputy. Ethan blocked me. Hey, sister-in-law, don't be so sad. I told you long ago, just let it go. Then why do you still call me sister-in-law? Yes, why is that? He seemed to have walked to an open area. The sound of the lighter opening and closing was clear and lively. Amelia, do you know that the most troublesome thing in this world is emotion? What does Ethan think of you? Why are you still so eager to fawn over him? His words were a bit blunt and also a bit harsh. Sister-in-law, you want to see Ethan, right? Okay, come here. He gave me an address, a place I didn't know. I took a taxi to the destination and then understood why I didn't know it. It was an abandoned construction site. The barking of stray dogs came from somewhere around. The moon was so bright tonight. A black car was parked at the entrance of the unfinished building. The bright white headlights were like shining on the wilderness. It was a Phaeton, his childhood friend's car. Ethan was standing in front of the car against the light. Did he smile at me? I couldn't see clearly. The light was too bright, and my eyes stung as soon as I saw his figure. He hooked his finger at me. So, he was really smiling. Amelia. He called my name. It didn't sound particularly affectionate. The teasing tone made me feel cold all over. If you can climb to the roof of this unfinished building, I'll come back to you. How about that? I'm terribly afraid of the dark. That unfinished building had no lights. Even though the moonlight was so bright tonight, the pitch-black stairway was like the deep throat of some monster. Are you scared? He bent down. The bright white headlights behind him were reflected in his eyes, making it hard to distinguish clearly. Didn't you say you love me? Prove it to me. As I stepped into the deep and dark stairway, I was thinking, would I die inside? He was clearly teasing me. Why did I still move forward? Was I crazy? Was there something wrong with my head? The stairs didn't even have handrails. The light of my mobile phone was pale. The floor was full of waste wood. It seemed that I saw some dark figure scurrying by. I was so scared that I couldn't hold my mobile phone firmly. Then I felt something cold touch my ankle, and only then did I realize it was an abandoned plastic bag. The night wind rushed into the stairway with unclosed windows all at once. When I looked down, the empty ground below seemed like an endless abyss. It was too quiet here. So quiet that when I stepped on the wood or plastic paper, the sound of my footsteps could be amplified infinitely. The abandoned stairs didn't even have railings. I could only walk along the wall. As I was getting closer to the roof, the moonlight became brighter and brighter. It was all white and silent. I looked down and, sure enough, couldn't see the shadow of the black phaeton anymore. I was tricked. I thought his teasing of me would stop there. Until I heard voices coming. It seemed that someone was on the phone. The person's voice was very loud, and the sound of his steps on the stairs pierced my eardrums one after another. Ethan, I'm on the roof now, but there's no one here. Didn't you say there was a reward for me? Where have you gone? Perhaps it was too quiet. His casual tone on the phone made my heart tremble when I heard it. Hiding, are you? She likes me so much that she'll definitely come up to the top floor. It was Ethan's voice. I covered my mouth, not daring to make a single sound. Hee, then I might have scared her. Don't hide anymore, girl. Ethan said that you're mine tonight. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. I tried my best to control my body that couldn't stop shaking. My mind went blank. At that moment, I finally understood that Ethan hated me. He really hated me. He wasn't the Ethan who used to be obedient to me. He wasn't. What on earth had I done that made him treat me like this? I couldn't help but tremble. The man walked around and passed by the cabinet where I was hiding but didn't find me. Really no one here, Ethan? No one? Have you checked the cabinets? Cabinets? How could a living person fit into such small cabinets? She's learned dance. The man stopped in front of me. It seemed that he touched the handle of the cabinet. I held my breath and rushed out suddenly. He was caught off guard and was really knocked down to the ground by me. His mobile phone fell far away, and the dim light flickered on the ground. I stumbled to my feet and started running. He cursed and chased after me. I had hardly ever heard such vulgar language in my life. There were a lot of scattered items in the abandoned building. I had no light, and I couldn't see the road ahead clearly even with the moonlight. The man caught up quickly, grabbed my clothes, and suddenly slapped me hard. The rough breathing like a wild beast echoed throughout the whole stairway. I felt a warm flow in my nose and then realized that my nose was bleeding from the slap. Quite wild, huh? I struggled with all my might, but suddenly found that he stopped restraining me. Keep running. Behind me was the deep staircase without railings. One more step back and I would fall down. He picked up the mobile phone that had fallen on the ground again. The call was still connected, and Ethan's voice came from the receiver. What's going on? This girl was running just now, and now I've driven her into a corner. Oh? The person on the other end of the phone didn't seem very interested either. The man grinned foolishly and kept pressing forward. I really had nowhere to retreat. I felt my fingers were empty and then realized that the ring on my middle finger had fallen off during the struggle. The diamond ring that Ethan hid in the cake on my birthday. Strangely, it used to fit so tightly. The man opened his arms towards me. My heels were already hanging in the air. The moon tonight was really beautiful. It was also this beautiful on the night when my father passed away. When the feeling of weightlessness hit me, I knew that I really fell. Maybe originally I hadn't thought of preferring death to submission. Maybe I just moved my heels 1 millimeter more. There was a sharp dull pain in the back of my head, and it dragged me into the darkness all at once. Dead or not? Cold knuckles stroked my neck. Since I regained consciousness, the severe pain in the back of my head had already made me unable to speak. I couldn't move my legs. They were as if they had no feeling. The light squeezed into my eyes, and then I realized that it was already morning. I opened my eyes and looked at the person squatting in front of me. Hiss, could it be that you've become stupid from the fall? I opened my mouth and called his name. There was a deep autumn in his eyes, which was the light I was familiar with. Ethan, why did you lie to me? He raised his eyebrows. I stared at him fixedly. I probably looked quite terrifying now. I had fallen from who knows which floor and couldn't move at all. Ethan, you haven't forgotten anything, right? His fingers were still on my neck, and he even had the mood to stroke my hair gently one by one. When did you find out? You told that man that I had learned dance, but I had never mentioned this to anyone except you. He sneered. Just because of this? Strangely enough, I didn't feel that he was a stranger anymore. The deliberately cold him was the awkward one. Now, his eyes looking at me were full of tender love. Why did you lie to me? I asked him again. Well, because. His fingers gently lifted my chin and wiped away the dust from the wound at the corner of my mouth. It hurt like fire. I have a terminal illness. His gaze was sincere. I stared at the dust floating behind him and wondered if my legs were already broken. Until his laughter pulled me back to my senses. It seemed that his laughter didn't mean he was in a good mood. What's with that expression? Don't you believe me anymore? Probably he had wiped clean all the parts of my face that could be wiped clean. He stepped back to observe me, as if looking at something dirty. All right, I lied to you. Actually, I hate you. What else could it be? I've hated you all along. I stared at him without making a sound. Since it didn't have the effect he wanted, he gently tugged at my hair. Don't you want to ask why? I shook my head. He clicked his tongue. Do you remember what day it is today? I deliberately chose today to show my cards to you. I actually had an answer in my heart, but I didn't dare to connect them. It's the memorial day of your bastard father. How could you forget it, right? I opened my eyes wide. My father was the most important person in my life. He gave up his scientific research path because of me and became a teacher in a junior high school. I probably lived on him alone in the first half of my life. He was the only color in my black and white memories. Even though his salary wasn't much, he was still stubbornly bringing me ridiculously expensive marinated beef every Saturday. He would buy me whatever I wanted and had never been angry with me. The neighbors all said that he was a nice guy who was a bit cowardly at heart. I couldn't believe that Ethan would describe him with the word bastard. I wanted to curse back, but when I got excited, several parts of my body hurt terribly. He looked at me like this and raised his eyebrows. He pinched my cheek with his hand, seeming quite satisfied with my unwilling expression. Amelia, how does it feel when the person you care about forgets you? Is it very painful? His hand gradually tightened. My cheeks were pinched so painfully. On the day your dear father drove her crazy, I planned to let you taste this too. That was probably a very long story. There was a little boy and a little girl who were playmates in the same orphanage. Their childhood might have witnessed wild geese flying across the sunset glow or the remaining redness of the thin clouds. The little girl was very pretty, lively and lovely, so she was quite popular in the orphanage. However, she wasn't adopted by any kind-hearted people because someone had reserved her before that. Yes, she was sold by the unscrupulous director of the orphanage. On the day the girl was taken away, she, who had always been smiling, inexplicably cried to the boy, as if she had already foreseen her tragic future. The boy was pulled by his friends. He also knew that he couldn't snatch a living person back. Besides, he was just a child who could be easily knocked down by adults at any time. After that, he hadn't seen her for a long time. To be honest, the orphanage was becoming more and more difficult to operate. Later, he and his friend escaped from the orphanage one day. Where could two homeless children go? They were chased by inexplicable stray dogs in the heavy rain, beaten by idle hooligans in a remote town, cheated out of money, and suffered a lot. However, during all these experiences, there was always a glimmer of light secretly hidden in his heart. Later, they finally managed to make a name for themselves in that territory. He started to look for her because he remembered that he had promised to protect her for a lifetime. But sometimes fate is so strange. He sent people to search for her in every street and alley but couldn't find her. However, he happened to meet her when he was wandering around casually. She didn't seem as pretty as before, but it didn't matter. He could still take her back, but she didn't want to go with him. He wiped the dust off his short-sleeved shirt, thinking that he might look too rustic. But the girl just pushed him away forcefully and told him to leave. He didn't understand, but he didn't want to force her either. He was just a bit worried, so he secretly followed her. Then, he witnessed the most unforgettable scene in his life. The girl walked to a remote room and then got down on all fours. After a while, a man came over. The man gently stroked the girl's hair and said with a smile, "You're so good." That man was the one who had bought the girl back then. He almost vomited at the sight. He rushed over and punched the man in the face. Teenagers at that age always had a fierce energy. The man was almost pinned to the ground and beaten by him. He beat the man half to death and then pulled the girl by the hand and ran. The girl was crying all the way. "Ethan, I'm no longer clean. I'm so dirty. I'm so dirty." He could only comfort the girl over and over again, saying that it was okay and that he would take care of everything. However, the sky really fell. They were too young and couldn't compete with that man at all. During those days, they hid here and there, but in the end, the girl was still taken away. He was desperate to get the girl back and wanted to rush out and fight that man to the death. Finally, his friend held him back tightly. "As long as the Green Mountains remain, there will always be firewood." Anyway, he and his friend hid again. The days of lying low were always long and tormenting. Sometimes he would secretly go to see the girl. The girl wasn't dead, but it would have been better if she were. It was during this period that he met Amelia. In his eyes, Amelia deserved to die. Can you imagine that after that man brutally tortured the girl, he could turn around and smile brightly at his own biological daughter? Yes, that man was Amelia's father. When the girl was lying on the bed on the verge of death, what was Amelia doing? Amelia was enjoying the meticulous love. When the girl was crying in agony, what was Amelia doing? Amelia was doing math problems in a warm little room. When the girl finally broke down after being tortured, what was Amelia doing? Amelia was admitted to college, proud and haughty. Amelia, just her name probably made his anger flare up. Such a bright and beautiful name didn't suit her. That's probably what he thought. Later, he finally rescued the girl. Moreover, he deliberately chose Amelia's birthday to end Amelia's father's life. However, the girl he rescued went crazy. She didn't remember who he was. She kept trembling when she saw anyone and would shout loudly from time to time. He didn't think it was enough. That man deserved to die, but how good could Amelia, the daughter of a born bastard, be? He wanted his daughter to suffer the same torture too. So, one day, he broke into her world. This was probably the story before I met him. There was never any sweet love in the first place. No one had ever saved me. My sister was right. I had always been alone. I used to think that their world was far away from me. But it turned out to be so close that I had already stepped into it. I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know what I was doing either. The light seemed very bright, extremely bright, so bright that I couldn't see the things in front of me clearly. I could only hear someone's voice. It was deep and carried an indescribable tenderness. Like the moonlight flowing slowly. "Why are you sleeping here?" It seemed that a coat was put on my shoulders. The cool and thin fragrance of tobacco and the unfading aroma of cedar wafted into my nose gently. My bangs were brushed aside. I then looked up and squinted at him. The hanging incandescent lamp made it not so easy for me to adapt to the light. It seemed that my eyes had been pressed against my arm for a long time and were a bit numb and painful. "You're back." I opened my mouth, but found that my voice was terribly hoarse. "Caught a cold? Your voice is so hoarse." He gently raised his eyebrows and looked at me. Today he was wearing the turtleneck sweater that I picked for him in the mall last time, which made him look a lot more refined for no reason. Suddenly, his forehead was pressed against mine. His suddenly enlarged face startled me. His eyes were tinged with an amber light by the dusk of the lamp, and I could clearly count his eyelashes. No fever, he said gently. When he moved away from me a little, I breathed a sigh of relief. I had a nightmare. I frowned and said to him, pulling his coat tighter around me. He was unpacking a cake opposite me. Only then did I realize that he had brought a cake home. Today was my birthday. What was the dream? I don't remember. Then how do you know it was a nightmare? Because it was so sad. He looked at me gently, with a seriousness and persistence that seemed to have been considered for a long time. Then you'd better try hard to remember. I won't let anyone who makes our Amelia sad off. I propped my chin up and watched him cut the cake. The plastic knife wasn't easy to handle, but held by his good-looking knuckles, it made the cutting look neat and pleasing to the eye. Ethan, you're all talk. Yes, I'm all talk because I haven't had a chance to act at all. He smiled helplessly, and a perfect slice of cake was cut off. I was just about to take it when the plastic knife with the chocolate shaped into "Happy Birthday" came in front of me. Don't you like chocolate? I bit off that piece of chocolate from the tip of the knife. The cocoa butter combined with the overly sweet cream mixed together in my mouth all at once. After eating the chocolate, he still didn't intend to let me do it myself. Strawberries, cream, cake, he scooped them up and handed them to me. I had no choice but to eat from the spoon in his hand. Are we still playing the romantic games that couples do? I complained. He laughed. Just playing. There wasn't much light at night. The light on the dining table didn't work after being used for a long time. It was dim. He seemed to think that feeding me cake was a very pleasant thing, and his eyes and eyebrows were filled with smiles. After he fed me the whole cake, I felt a bit sick of the sweetness. I seemed to have forgotten something very important. What is it? He propped his chin up, and his thumb brushed the corner of my mouth. The wedding ring. The wedding ring that he hid in the cake. I suddenly stood up, and the chair and table made a loud crashing sound. The chandelier swayed. I backed away in horror, but he didn't move. I couldn't see his expression clearly. Everything stopped moving, and then a cracking sound came, like solid ice cracking bit by bit. I couldn't breathe. My neck was grabbed. I struggled violently and woke up with a start, coughing as if I was going to cough my lungs out. I looked up in a flustered manner and met his eyes. This time it wasn't a dream. It was reality. Because those eyes were not gentle at all, just a blood-red, savage deep pool. Are you awake? Ethan's knuckles were still clasped around my neck. In the dream, he had gently wiped the corner of my mouth with his finger. A few strands of my hair hung down, swaying and blocking my view. I managed to look around. There were still the pale white walls. These days, I had been falling asleep, waking up, and falling asleep again. When I was asleep, I always dreamed of memories related to him. When I woke up, he would choke my neck. It was so uncomfortable. What's with that expression? He frowned in dissatisfaction and forced a smile on my lips. It hurt a bit from what he did. Strangely enough, why did he want to see me smile? I didn't know if I was too hungry or too thirsty. I tilted my head up and let him do as he pleased. Anyway, that's how I had spent these days, and I was kind of used to it already. What exactly did he want to do to me? He picked me up and found a doctor to sew up my wounds. At first, I thought he was going to make me experience all the things that the girl had suffered, but these days, he just woke me up from my sleep occasionally. I was also like this. I seemed to like sleeping a lot. It clearly wasn't a very comfortable environment, and there were still so many things weighing on me, but I actually slept with a clear conscience. He was very dissatisfied with me like this. I was already so obedient, but he still always looked at me with a fierce expression. Something sharp and cold pressed against the back of my neck. I subconsciously moved away, and then I heard him laugh. Are you scared? I tilted my head up to look at him. What is this? The syringe moved on my skin, bringing some sharp stinging pain, like being pressed by the fangs of some fierce beast. I shrank back a bit more. Guess. Something for euthanasia? Huh? A sneer that didn't mean anything good. Do you think if I wanted to kill you, I'd use such a gentle method? The syringe was inserted into my skin, and the pain made all the nerves in my body jolt. Was it because of his poor technique or the needle was particularly thick? I had never felt such pain when getting injections before. After giving me the injection, he stood up and looked down at me from above. I hope you won't sleep all day long. It's so comfortable for you, but I haven't achieved my purpose of torturing you at all. Actually, it wasn't comfortable when I was asleep. My head was muddled, and I couldn't wake up. In my dreams, there were all the scenes of being with him before. The door was closed, and I watched the light being suddenly blocked. I thought that he really knew how to oppress me. I hated the dark the most. In the past, I could escape from these through sleep, but today, I just couldn't fall asleep no matter what. I hugged my knees and wondered what he had injected me with. In TV shows, gangs and the like would use drugs to control hostages. Thinking about it in this way, I was a bit scared. My fear of the dark had reached an extraordinary level. When Ethan found out for the first time, he was full of disbelief. Kiddo? Sleeping with the light on, huh? I glared at him. I'm just afraid of the dark. Some people are afraid of bugs, some are afraid of mice. I'm afraid of the dark. Is that not okay? Okay. I'll be your light from now on. Wherever you go, I'll shine for you. All right? So you see, a man's words are just lies. The room with no light was like the mouth of a giant beast, or like it could give birth to countless strange and grotesque devils. I huddled up, but still felt that there were invisible people standing around me. I don't know how long it took before I fell asleep in a daze. I didn't dream this time. When I woke up, I was unusually awake. I even had the strength to stand up from the bed. But not long after I stood up, he pushed the door open and came in. There was a gentle morning light on him that didn't seem to belong to him. He looked up at me, with a face full of incomprehension. I no longer knew how to look at him. I wanted to escape and ask for help, but I had no way to do so. In this closed room, only when he opened the door would a little light seep in. Actually, sometimes, when you're thirsty, hungry, and in pain, you don't even know which side to ask for help from first. Moreover, it seemed that he wouldn't help me. He would just look at me with a sarcastic expression. Awakened early today? Looks like the medicine worked well. Medicine? Was it the injection he gave me yesterday? This madman. I pursed my lips and looked at him. He just slightly curved the corners of his mouth. What would you like to eat? Do I have a choice? As soon as I made the first sound, he frowned. What's wrong with your voice? Of course it was because I hadn't drunk any water for a long time. He went out for a while and came back carrying several thermal bags. When opened, there were several cooked dishes inside. I didn't know if it was ironic or not, but they were all my favorites. I silently scooped up the porridge to drink, while he stood not far away, folding his arms and watching me eat. I didn't even need to sense it to know that his gaze was too intense. In the closed room, the air didn't seem to flow much. It was so quiet that only the slight sounds of me eating could be heard. I ate a lot. I didn't know if it was because I was too hungry or... I always felt that this might be my last meal. Full? A voice without much emotion came from above my head. Then my chin was forcibly lifted. His fingers brushed against my jaw where several wounds had scabbed over. He rubbed them a little. Come on, say, ah. I opened my mouth and found it so hard to make a sound. Tisk, forget it. Don't talk. Then he threw a piece of clothing that he had brought along with the thermal bags to me. Change into it. The fabric was as smooth as silk, and the cutting craftsmanship was quite exquisite. I changed into the clothes in front of him. He didn't avoid it. What could I do? Did I even have the right to drive him away? The design of the dress was quite bold in some places. It was the first time I had worn such a dress, and I wasn't used to it. But his gaze was too piercing. He turned my shoulders to make me turn around, opened something and smeared it on my back. Was it concealer? Most of the back of the dress was hollowed out. His fingers slid across the base of my spine. When the cream was applied, it brought a cool feeling. He then used the concealer to cover all the scars on my face. He stepped back a few steps and looked at me as if he were examining an item. Then he raised his eyebrows. Amelia, do you understand? Even with your deathly pale look as if you're barely hanging on, there are still people who would like it. After 30 or 40 minutes, I finally found out. He took me with him, and the car stopped in front of a brightly lit nightclub. The luxury cars coming and going everywhere indicated the noble status of the guests inside. He squeezed my wrist. Although I remember that you seem unable to drink, but tonight, you'll have to endure it. In the VIP room where wine glasses were clinking, I could no longer clearly see what the people who toasted looked like. I just knew that I was passively made to drink one bottle of liquor after another. My chaotic mind couldn't form a single thought. Even my vision was blurry and swaying, colorful and surging. I thought that since I finally got out, I would have a chance to ask for help. But Ethan watched me closely. Those people with malicious intentions just looked at me as if watching a joke. Only then did I understand why he dared to bring me out so openly. I didn't know how I walked out of the door. My feet had long lost their strength. The night wind blew onto my exposed skin all at once, and I shivered violently. My waist was hooked. The tall buildings in the distance were still brightly lit, but the night was endless. The contents in my stomach felt like a fire burning. Wherever my eyes could see, it was clearly prosperous yet full of sores. Is it over? I asked him. Was this kind of torture over? Or was it just beginning? I couldn't see anything clearly. I couldn't even stand steadily. Alcohol was probably really not a good thing. So much so that all the resentment I had accumulated these days burst out. What have I done wrong? Or is it that I was born to pay for his sins? I vaguely looked at his eyes, but couldn't see anything clearly because of the tears. The light of the street lamp was stretched long and thin. He was clearly the person I loved deeply. He was clearly the one who had redeemed me. Now, this Ethan just made me feel disgusted. The night wind blew past people's skin without any scruples. The heart in my chest was beating wildly. People always hit rock bottom and rebound when they have nothing left. It was the same for me. I wanted to drag him to hell with me. That's when hatred rose from the bottom of my heart. But I couldn't push him away. He reached out and pried open my fingers that were gripping his collar one by one. Those black eyes, how many times had I looked into them? It was strange. 3 years were like a dream, like a grand play. They were all actors, and only I was the audience who was dragged onto the stage to be toyed with. I didn't understand. I didn't know anything. Was this also a mistake? The shadows of the trees were swaying noisily. The garage was silent. Until he kissed me. Maybe it was for a second or 2 seconds. I hated the all too familiar touch. I also hated that he knew how to please me. I pushed him away with all my might. He swayed a couple of times. In his pitch black eyes, nothing could be seen clearly. It's not over, Amelia. We've just begun. His hoarse voice carried emotions that I couldn't make out at all. He locked my hands and pushed me into a white car that was coming. There was a very heavy impact. When the car door closed, the car shook. Before I could figure out what was going on, my exposed shoulder was grasped by someone. The strange touch made me shudder. We haven't seen each other for long, right? Do you still remember me, miss? But my chin was turned around. The man's eyes were long and narrow. It was just that the thumb ring on his finger pressed against my jaw and made it hurt a bit. I shrank back. I remembered him. Just now, Ethan had taken me to toast him. What's your name? He asked me. I leaned my back against the door handle, glared at him and shook my head. The gift Ethan gave me this time is a bit naughty. In an instant, it felt like my mind had been struck hard. I had been sold by him again. It wasn't over yet. My hell had just begun. Last time wasn't enough. He was going to make all the harm that girls suffered befall me. This was just the first step. The car was speeding along. The scarlet light outside the window streaked by. My dress wasn't conservative in the first place. Wherever he touched me, it could make me shiver. The more you struggle, the more excited I'll be. However, I'm quite satisfied with the gift Ethan gave me this time. He really understands my preferences better and better. I lifted my foot and kicked him. He raised his hand and grasped my ankle. Then he easily took off my high heel. The rough touch went from bottom to top. My heart was pounding. The alcohol had an unwanted effect at this moment. Meanwhile, my whole body felt as if it had fallen into an ice cellar. I struggled violently and seemed to bump into the front seat, causing the car to shake a bit. His eyes instantly turned cold, and his hand quickly grasped my neck. "Try moving again?" His gradually tightening fingers made it hard for me to breathe. My hand subconsciously tried to pull his palm away, but he didn't budge at all. He didn't let go until my vision started to blur. I gasped for breath. The feeling of oxygen suddenly rushing into my lungs wasn't pleasant. I retched a few times and stared at him, panting. Some people always like to ask for trouble. Yes, some people always like to ask for trouble. Sometimes I always thought that since things had come to this, I might as well give up. Letting others control me wasn't a bad ending for me who was stuck in the mire. Maybe it would be better if I died. If I died, I would be free. The sticky touch slid up my thigh again. I looked at him indifferently, as if the hand with a fishy smell was slowly pulling me into the darkness. I opened my eyes. It seemed that I exerted a sudden force and kicked him in a certain part. He opened his eyes wide in pain and loosened his grip on me. I then desperately pulled at the door handle. The car wasn't slow. Although the driver suddenly stepped on the brakes, when I rolled out, the intimate contact between my skin and the ground still made it burn with pain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that the car had stopped. There wasn't even a single person on the street in the middle of the night. I had no choice but to stand up and stagger forward as I ran. I didn't know where my shoes had gone, whether there were some stones on the ground that stabbed into the soles of my feet desperately. My vision was shaking, and there was only one thought in my mind telling me to keep running forward, until I tripped over some steps and knelt straight on the ground. Even the night became silent. I stared blankly at the empty sky. The street lamp flickered lonely. The puddle reflected the little remaining light. I suddenly felt that my whole chest was filled with a powerless emotion. How long had passed? How long? No one chased after me. There was nothing. The pitch-black alley entrance behind me stretched into the invisible distance. It seemed that I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Never again. I didn't dare to go home, afraid that Ethan would find me. In the following few days, I stayed in a relatively hidden hotel. I started to suffer from insomnia all night long. Whenever I closed my eyes, various scenes about Ethan would pop up. Some were real, and some were just my imagination. I didn't love him anymore. Even my hatred had become blurred. Ethan might not be unable to find me. I thought that perhaps his revenge had come to an end. That was okay too. Just like that, the name Ethan never appeared in my life again. He and his childhood friend disappeared without a trace. Had my life returned to the right track? I didn't know. I went to the cemetery to visit my father. I also went to the warehouse in my hometown and rummaged through it. When I saw a set of torture instruments he had hidden on the second floor of the basement, my heart still beat violently. The surging wave swallowed up all the questions I wanted to ask. I opened my mouth but didn't know where to start. I used to always think that the past was gone and the life looking forward was full of hope. Only then did I realize that the marks carved by the things that had disappeared were always there, ugly and unforgettable. If this was Ethan's revenge, then he probably succeeded. I wasn't as miserable as that girl, but I truly experienced what Ethan had experienced before: loneliness, anger, despair or pain. The only good thing about this for me was probably that I finally discovered the truth of the so-called love between Ethan and me. I wouldn't be the clown who was kept in the dark anymore. Later, I went back to work and accepted new people. My sister still came to bother me from time to time, but from her tentative tone, I could sense that she had also lost Ethan's contact information. The doctor said that I could try to regard the things that happened in those years as a dream. Since I couldn't forget them, I could pretend that they had never existed and never happened. Anyway, I couldn't step into that place twice again. That would be okay. What was I thinking in the second before I was suddenly knocked unconscious on my way home from work? I was thinking, here it comes again. I was drawn into their world again. Sure enough, once you stepped into the mire, you could never get clean. What came into view was a dazzling paleness. Why was the bedsheet so cold? I didn't know. It was as if my body would never give off heat again. The door was opened, and I looked at him quietly. Does your head hurt? His voice was so gentle that I felt it was unreal. I asked them to bring you here. They might have misunderstood me and been a bit too harsh. He took a few steps towards me. I subconsciously shrank back. Ethan. I squeezed out his fragmented name from my words. What else do you want? The man's pupils were very black, like an endless abyss. When he looked at me, I always felt that the chaotic blackness would swallow me up all at once. What do I want? I haven't figured it out yet. The man's hand gently grasped my chin. The cold touch seeped into my skin inch by inch. I turned my head away, and he laughed. A gentle wind blew in through the crack of the door. I stared intently at his back as he closed the door and left. It seemed that the memories I had managed to bury were gathering again, and the broken pictures became more and more intense with his arrival. I jumped off the bed and looked around. It was a very simple room with a bed, a lamp, and a table. There were no windows, and the door of the room was locked with a combination lock. The four bleak walls were facing me directly. After a while, he came back carrying a thermos box. Are you going to make me eat my fill and then help you receive clients again? I stared straight at him. The chill emanating from him made me shiver involuntarily. I really didn't know how I should look at him. Sometimes, I didn't even bother to waste my hatred on him. Eat. He just said it gently. I can't eat. I glared at him. They're all your favorites. How could you not be able to eat them? He slightly raised his eyebrows. I can't eat when I see your face. I hadn't thought that I would say this sentence right in front of him. After all, he still held my life in his hands. He could easily break my neck. He was also stunned for a moment. I thought he would take the food away directly. At the very least, he would starve me for a few meals. But instead, he turned around and really walked out of the room. In the empty room, the aroma of the food rushed into my nostrils all at once. Wasn't it a bit ironic? I still remembered the fish soup I cooked for him. He had let it go bad. I held the disposable chopsticks in my hand. I stared at them, hesitated for a few seconds, and then broke them. The broken pieces of wood were uneven. I pressed them hard against my wrist and rubbed vigorously, but it was useless. I couldn't cut my skin open. I just scraped it a bit, and the red marks that appeared were a bit scary. Suddenly, the door was yanked open. I was stunned and was suddenly hugged by him. My wrist was tightly grasped. The smell on the man was like desolate gunpowder smoke. In this position, I didn't know if he was hugging me or strangling me. I felt my bones hurt a bit. I opened my mouth but didn't want to make a sound. My mind was turning sluggishly. I wanted to escape from this embrace quickly. I struggled with all my strength, but this time he held me tightly. In the end, I couldn't struggle anymore. I looked up at the open crack of the door. Let me go. My voice seemed a bit hoarser than I had expected. Let me go. I don't want to be entangled with you anymore. But a deep, muffled voice came from above my head. Ethan's palm gently lifted my hair, so gentle that it sent a shiver through me. Only this, I won't promise you. I think Ethan is sick. I can't figure out the reason why he does such things. The day he gave me to that boss, I already thought that he wouldn't care about me anymore. But then he happened to catch me back again. When the lights were turned off in the windowless room, the darkness wrapped around me layer by layer. I stared wide-eyed at the ceiling, but after a while, my head became dizzy. Was I too tired? Or, was it because of the food? Only fragmented thoughts remained in my mind. The last image I saw was probably the white light from outside leaking in as he pushed the door open. I had a very long, long dream. It was the days not long after I met him and when my father had just passed away. At the funeral, it was drizzling. There were quite a number of people who came to pay their respects, but I had already cried until I couldn't squeeze out any more tears. The evening wind in early winter was bone-chilling. The thin light of the setting sun quietly fell behind the mountain. I numbly felt the passage of time until a corner of the curtain in the morning hall was lifted. Ethan was such a person. It was hard to ignore his existence. The man was wearing a black windbreaker. His dark, ink-like pupils were somewhat indistinct. In the white rain curtain, it seemed that not a single drop of rain fell on him. I stared at him blankly. At that time, our relationship probably couldn't be said to be very intimate. The wind and rain suddenly blew into the curtain. In front of my father's body, I slowly thought about what I should say to him. Until I suddenly fell into an embrace. Actually, his windbreaker was very, very cold, but the emotions in my soul that were hard to smooth out suddenly surged up. The rising emotions were constantly tugging at my nerves. I grasped the hem of his clothes, and my tears soaked his collar. I clearly thought that I wouldn't be sad anymore, but just because of his embrace, all my bottom lines were shattered. The shadow like smoke disappeared quickly. When I turned my head, I was already in our former home. At that time, we had been in a relationship for a while. On a rainy afternoon, I was sitting on the sofa revising my thesis while he was leaning beside me playing with a game controller. The rain was hitting the window lattice, but the coldness couldn't reach inside the room. The images on the TV were chaotic. I couldn't write anymore, but he was playing vigorously. I sighed and watched the game he was playing. But before I watched for long, he pressed the pause button. The warm light indoors made his pupil color look lighter, making it easy for people to get lost in it. As if possessed, I held my breath. "What are you doing?" He suddenly laughed and suddenly moved closer to me. "Do you want me to kiss you?" Such straightforward words easily made my ears turn red. I turned my head away. He gently grasped my chin with his hand. The movement couldn't be said to be very gentle. He casually took a pillow and put it under my waist, then bent over and kissed me. The heavy rain drowned out the sounds, like I had no other choice. I numbly watched this scene, feeling the emotion of wanting to push him away surging in my heart, but I was powerless to do so. Memories were like a sticky quagmire, desperately trying to tear me apart. When I opened my eyes in the morning, I saw the second person I least wanted to see in my life. "Sister-in-law, don't look at me like that. I'm not your sister-in-law." I tried to see something from his childhood friend's eyes, but I couldn't. He was even smiling happily, as if he wished for more chaos. Do you know? The first time I saw Ethan, he took back the gift he had given away. I was stunned for a moment. He swayed his body. "What did you think? You don't think that you could really escape that day by yourself, do you? Also, on the day at the construction site, David could have violated you but didn't. Do you know why? Because Ethan drove the car back again." I forced a grin. I didn't know if this could still be called a smile. Should I thank him then? His childhood friend waved his hand at me and took out a dagger from his sleeve, pressing it against my neck. His tone changed all of a sudden. The person who was laughing and joking just a second ago now really looked like a vicious criminal. "I could kill you because Ethan can't have weaknesses. I could also not kill you, unless..." On the fourth day of being imprisoned in this room by Ethan, I had already gotten familiar with the pattern of his daily visits. My childhood friend told me that sleeping pills would be put in the water given to me every day. So I secretly poured out the water. Sure enough, I didn't feel sleepy at all that night. I forced myself to keep my eyes open until I heard the click when the door was opened. The man's footsteps got closer and closer. His cold fingers touched my forehead. I remembered that his fingers used to be warm all the time, but I couldn't recall exactly how long ago that was. He seemed to have stood by my bedside for a very long time. Until I heard his soft breathing. There was always a smell of unfading pine snow on him, like a sober kind of depravity, and also like a well-disguised warmth. When our lips touched, I couldn't bear it anymore and turned my face away. In the darkness, when I opened my eyes, I happened to meet his gaze. I had described his eyes, brow bone, nose bridge, and lips many times. How ridiculous. He was the person I had once adored, but now he was a nightmare that I couldn't avoid. "Poured out the water? You're really naughty." His voice blended into the night, carrying an obscure and hoarse tone. Don't touch me. I glared at him fiercely. Hate me now? In the desolate and lonely darkness, he asked me softly, while his fingers were intentionally or unintentionally playing with the ends of my hair. But what can I do? I don't want to let you go. I found that during the days when you were away, I always thought of you. In the end, I don't even know if I was playing with you or with myself. Amelia, I can treat you as I did before. I don't know if it was a minute or 2 minutes later when I found my voice. Do you mean we start over? Was it because my expression was too pale or because my words were full of tremors? Forget all the things that happened before. Don't you think it's too absurd? The person in front of me seemed to have expected my expression, but I couldn't bear the abyss covered with mud. I didn't want to see the emotion called remorse in his eyes. It made me sick. Don't touch me, Ethan. Never touch me again from now on. I was moved to a room with windows. I could also move around freely in the villa, but I couldn't get out of the courtyard gate because there were guards. I once stood in the courtyard to analyze the geographical location. Surrounded by mountains on all sides, it was an extremely remote place. Ethan would come about 3 times a week. He became extremely obedient to me. That kind of ingratiation was something I had never had from him before. I once hit him with a vase. The flying glass scratched his forehead, but he wasn't angry. I poured out the food he brought right in front of him. He just smiled helplessly and asked me what I wanted to eat and told the maid to make it for me. I said that I wanted to play the piano. And the next day, a brand new grand piano appeared in the living room. He seemed to have no bottom line and even became a bit pitiful. Pitiful? It seemed that I wasn't qualified to say that about him. I was the most pitiful one. At the end of autumn, Ethan pushed open the door of the villa. I had fallen asleep leaning on the sofa. He came over to hug me, but I struggled free. Why didn't you go to sleep in your room? Forgot. I picked up the fallen book and walked towards my room without looking back. My wrist was grasped by the man from behind. I stopped. Today is my birthday. Spend it with me. It seemed to be like this. Today was his birthday. I hadn't looked into his eyes like this for a long time. They were like a deep pool that could swallow people up, with something indistinct that I couldn't see clearly in them. But that day, for some reason, I couldn't get angry. The birthday cake was brought by him. Of course, I didn't have a birthday present for him. A lamp was hanging from the roof, and its weak light couldn't fill the whole room. Amelia, this is our 6th year together. The 6th year. My throat felt inexplicably bitter. The sweet and greasy smell of cream lingered in my nose but wouldn't go away. I called his name, and he suddenly looked up at me. Ethan, how many more 6 years do you want to torture me for? Even though it was warm light, it looked so cold when reflected in his pupils. He just looked at me for a long while and then said to light the candles. So the flickering candle flames were lit. I remembered every birthday I had spent with him before. Memories suddenly tore at my mind, about how I had prepared birthday presents for him with great joy in the past, and about every cake I had made for him by hand. I suddenly stood up, and the flames flickered because of my movement. I won't spend it with you anymore. I dropped these words and turned to walk up the stairs. It was very quiet behind me. I didn't know if he was looking at my back. I just felt that every place here suffocated me. I didn't want to see his face or recall the things that had happened 2 or 3 years ago. I thought that perhaps it was true. The autumn night was too cold, and it wasn't enough even when I huddled up. When the door was pushed open, I was still hugging my arms tightly and shivered. Ethan squatted in front of me. The not-so-bright light from the living room leaked in behind him. He looked at me with a bit of helplessness as I glared at him fiercely. If he wanted to trap me, I couldn't struggle free at all. So I simply bit his shoulder in one go. He didn't seem to feel any pain. Amelia, no one will bully you anymore. They have disappeared from this world today. No wonder when he entered the door today, although his expression was normal, he couldn't hide the faint smell of rust on him. But didn't he know that he was the one who stabbed the knife into my body fiercely? In this world, you are the person I hope to disappear the most. I said this with a tight throat, almost gnashing my teeth. His fingers were inserted into my hair. I didn't know if he was smiling or not. Amelia, if you want to say hurtful words, you can just say them. It felt like it was the season of autumn rain. The wind seeped into people's bones piercingly, like those days that had long gone and would never come back. It was as if looking at one's own soul, only to find that it was already in tatters. Late autumn. In cities a bit further north, the temperature had dropped sharply by this time. There was underfloor heating in the house, so I didn't really need to worry about whether it was cold or not. Auntie would come to prepare 3 meals a day, and she also cleaned the house. I didn't have to do anything. Occasionally, I would flip through the books in the study because the types of books were all quite interesting to me. There was a landline in the living room, and only he could call in. I couldn't make outgoing calls. Look, just as we were talking, the phone rang. The tune of F. Mayer Elise echoed throughout the entire living room. Clearly, there was no noise, and the tune could be said to be gentle, yet my heart was still beating like a drum at the right time. I picked up the phone, and the person on the other end sounded urgent. Amelia, there's a secret passage in the study. Push aside the 3rd book from the left on the 2nd row of the bookshelf. The password is your birthday. Escape from there. Run as far as you can. Don't say you know me. Hide for a while. Perhaps I had been silent for too long. His breathing became a bit calmer. Even a bit cautious. Hello? I'm safe now. Slowly, I found my voice, but there was so much noise on the receiver. The noisy sound was irritating my eardrums, and I subconsciously gripped the receiver tightly. Are you really safe? He seemed to have stopped completely. Even his panting had subsided a lot. But I heard gunshots and the sounds of other people running. Where are you? He asked me. At your villa. Who's with you? The police. Probably a chaotic silence. Suddenly, he laughed. Forget it. It's okay as long as you're fine. The police already knew my whereabouts 7 days ago. Besides Vincent, you're the one who betrayed me, right? Oh, but you've never been on my side, so it can't be considered betrayal, can it? Actually, on the day I fell out of the car, I rushed into the nearest police station in the middle of the night and stammered to the police on duty to describe what had happened to me. But I could never find Ethan again. In the boundless night, he was like dissipating mist, disappearing without a trace. I had no evidence to accuse Ethan. Let alone accusing him, it was even hard to find him. He disappeared overnight, and there were no traces related to him in all the places he had stayed. It wasn't until that day when his childhood friend came to me and said that he wanted to turn himself in. I used him to successfully get hold of Ethan's clues, and then, I was found by Ethan. Based on the clues I provided and the testimony of Ethan's childhood friend, the police successfully tracked him down. His childhood friend said that Ethan couldn't go far. For a woman, the daughter of his enemy at that, someone who had fallen in love time and time again would sooner or later fall into the gutter. I might as well go to prison. Maybe I can live a few more years by redeeming myself. That was what he said exactly. Actually, the place around me was already full of police officers, all hoping that I could get some words out of Ethan through this phone call. Ethan, where are you? I asked him. He chuckled softly. The background noise was so loud that I could hardly hear him clearly. The police beside me were using instruments to detect his location. What did you say? I said, Amelia, tell them not to bother looking. It's too late. Also, a patchy scene with noisy sounds stretched everything out long. It seemed that no one was running, and no one was raising a gun. For a moment, the world was extremely quiet, and the voice on the receiver was clearer than ever before. I won't accompany you home for dinner tonight. Actually, he had said this to me many, many times before. Because he was always so busy with work that he couldn't go home at night. I was still stunned for a moment, and then the deafening explosion rushed into my eardrums. There was a buzzing in my ears, and I couldn't hear a sound for a long time, like a string that had been plucked randomly and couldn't stop vibrating. I looked blankly at the faces of the people in front of me, perhaps broken, perhaps panicked. It wasn't until I felt liquid running down my jaw that I realized that my ears were bleeding. I had such a quiet period to recall things, unable to hear anyone's voice. The first time I met him, he pushed open the door of the room. The autumn rain slid across his clothes, and the evening wind blew into his long coat. He called my name as if he had said it many times before,